The snow fell in thick sheets across the frozen wasteland of Kepler 442b, a planet that shouldn't have supported life at all. The atmosphere was thin, the temperatures hovered at -40 on a good day, and the wildlife consisted mostly of crystalline predators that hunted by sound. Yet here stood Captain Sarah Chen, trudging through knee-deep powder with a plasma rifle slung across her back and a geological scanner in her gloved hand. She had been walking for 3 hours since her shuttle crashed. The distress beacon was active, but rescue wouldn't arrive for another 6 hours minimum. The mining colony was 40 kilometers east, and she had no intention of freezing to death while waiting. So she walked, one boot in front of the other, her breath forming clouds of ice crystals that sparkled in the pale blue light of the distant star. That's when she felt the tug. Sarah looked down and saw it, a creature no bigger than a house cat, covered in white fur that blended perfectly with the snow. It had 6 legs, all of them currently wrapped around her right boot, and a face that looked like someone had mixed a bear cub with a fennec fox and added far too many eyes. 8 of them, to be exact, all staring up at her with an expression that could only be described as desperate determination. She tried to shake her foot. The creature held on tighter. "Get off," Sarah muttered, kicking gently. The thing made a high-pitched chirping sound, but didn't budge. Its tiny claws had punched through the outer layer of her thermal boot and were now firmly embedded in the reinforced fabric beneath. Sarah sighed, watching her breath freeze in the air. She didn't have time for this. The temperature was dropping as the planet's short day began to fade into its long, lethal night. She had to keep moving. So she did. She took a step forward, and the creature came with her, still clinging to her boot. It chirped again, louder this time, as it was dragged through the snow. Sarah ignored it and kept walking. Another step, another chirp. The thing was surprisingly light, barely noticeable except for the occasional scrape of its body against the ice. "You picked the wrong human," she said aloud. Not because she expected the creature to understand, but because talking helped her stay focused in the cold. "I've got 40 clicks to cover and about 5 hours of daylight left. You're either coming with me or letting go." The creature chirped a third time, almost like it was responding. Then it adjusted its grip and tucked its small body closer to her boot, minimizing drag. Sarah couldn't help but crack a small smile beneath her thermal mask. "Smart little parasite, aren't you?" She checked her scanner. The terrain ahead was relatively flat for the next 10 kilometers. Then it became rocky and treacherous. She'd have to pick up the pace. Sarah increased her stride, and the creature bounced along with each step, its fur collecting snow like a tiny living snowplow. An hour passed. The creature hadn't let go. Sarah had tried twice more to shake it off, but each time it only gripped harder and made that same insistent chirping sound. She'd given up after the second attempt. There were more important things to worry about, like the fact that her scanner was picking up movement 200 meters to her left. She stopped and crouched low, her hand moving automatically to her rifle. The movement on the scanner grew closer. Then she saw them. 3 crystalline wolves, each one the size of a small horse, their bodies made of some kind of living ice that refracted the light into rainbow patterns, beautiful and absolutely deadly. They hadn't spotted her yet. They were tracking something else, their heads low to the ground. Sarah held her breath and slowly began to back away. That's when the creature on her boot made a sound. Not a chirp this time, but a low, resonant hum that vibrated through her entire leg. The crystalline wolves froze. Their heads snapped in her direction, dozens of faceted eyes focusing on her position. "You've got to be kidding me," Sarah whispered. The wolves charged. Sarah ran, her legs pumped through the deep snow, her lungs burning in the thin atmosphere. The rifle was useless against crystalline predators. Their bodies could disperse energy weapons, and ballistic rounds just shattered harmlessly against their ice-like hides. The only way to survive an encounter with them was to not have an encounter at all. She could hear them behind her, the sound of their bodies cutting through the snow like knives through water. Fast, too fast. She wasn't going to make it. Then the creature on her boot hummed again, louder this time, and something impossible happened. The ground beneath the wolves erupted. Pillars of ice shot up from the snow, creating a forest of frozen spikes between Sarah and her pursuers. The wolves slammed into the barrier, their bodies shattering against the ice with sounds like breaking glass. When the fragments settled, the pillars melted back into the snow as if they'd never existed. Sarah stopped running and spun around, her chest heaving. The path behind her was clear. No wolves, no bodies, just pristine snow and the fading echo of that strange hum. She looked down at the creature still clinging to her boot. It stared back up at her with all 8 eyes, and for a moment, Sarah could swear it looked smug. "What are you?" she asked. The creature chirped and settled back against her boot. Sarah stood there for a full minute, trying to process what had just happened. Then she checked her scanner, confirmed the wolves were gone, and started walking again. The creature came along as it had before, dragging through the snow without complaint. The next 3 hours passed in relative silence. Sarah made good time across the flatlands and began her ascent into the rocky region her scanner had warned her about. The terrain here was treacherous, full of hidden crevasses and unstable ice bridges. She had to slow down, testing each step before committing her full weight. The creature never let go. Even when she had to climb over boulders or shimmy through narrow passages, it adjusted its position but maintained its death grip on her boot. At one point, Sarah had to cross a gap by jumping between 2 ice formations. She landed hard, and the creature bounced violently against her leg, but still it held on, chirping what almost sounded like encouragement. "You're either the bravest thing I've ever met or the stupidest," Sarah said as she caught her breath on the far side of the gap. The sun was getting low now, casting long shadows across the ice. Sarah checked her position. 20 kilometers to go, 2 hours of light left. She was cutting it close, but she'd make it. That's when her scanner went dark. She tapped it, shook it, ran a diagnostic. Nothing. The screen remained black. Either the cold had finally killed the electronics, or something else was interfering with it. Neither option was good. Sarah pulled out her backup compass, an old mechanical one her father had given her before she left Earth. It still worked. Thank whatever gods watched over fools and explorers. She oriented herself east and kept moving. The creature hummed again, soft and steady. It wasn't a warning this time. It felt almost like comfort, like a cat purring. Sarah found herself matching her breathing to the rhythm of it. The cold seemed less biting. Her legs felt less tired. She walked faster. As night began to fall, Sarah saw lights in the distance. The mining colony, finally. She'd made it. Relief flooded through her, and she picked up her pace, practically jogging now despite her exhaustion. She reached the colony perimeter as the last light faded from the sky. The gates opened, and workers in thermal suits rushed out to meet her, their faces shocked to see anyone alive after a shuttle crash in this weather. "Captain Chen? We got your distress beacon. We thought you'd be waiting at the crash site." "Walked," Sarah said simply, her voice hoarse from the cold. 40 clicks. Couldn't wait. The workers ushered her toward the medical bay, asking questions, checking her for injuries. That's when one of them noticed the creature still latched onto her boot. "Captain, you've got a keeper attached to you." "A what?" "A keeper. They're native to this planet. Rare. Most people never see one." The worker, a young woman with kind eyes, knelt down for a closer look. "They only attach to beings they think can protect them. But the strange thing is, once a keeper bonds, they protect back. You probably wouldn't have survived the walk without it." Sarah looked down at the creature. The keeper. It stared back at her with those 8 impossible eyes, and finally, It released its grip on her boot. It dropped into the snow and shook itself, sending ice crystals flying. Then it chirped once, turned, and bounded off into the darkness beyond the colony walls. "Wait!" Sarah called out, surprising herself. But the creature was gone, disappeared into the frozen wasteland as if it had never existed. The young worker smiled. "They don't stay once you're safe. That's why they're called keepers. They keep you alive, then they leave. But if you ever come back to this planet, it'll find you again. They always remember." Sarah stood at the edge of the colony, staring out into the night where the keeper had vanished. Her boot felt strangely light now, almost empty. "Thank you," she whispered to the darkness. Somewhere in the distance, carried on the frozen wind, came the sound of a single chirp in reply. Sarah smiled and turned back toward the warmth of the colony, her hand unconsciously brushing the spot on her boot where the little creature had clung for 40 kilometers. She'd file her report, get checked by the medics, and eventually return to her ship in orbit. But she knew, somehow, that this wouldn't be her last visit to Kepler 442b. Some bonds once formed don't break just because you walk away.